Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to attend our webinar this morning. We're very grateful for you taking the time. My name is Mary McCarthy. I'm a Senior Inspector with the Health and Safety Authority, and my team, including Michael Walsh, who will do much of the presenting this morning, and Ger McSweeney, who's on the line. We've developed this new code of practice on safe use of industrial trucks. And this morning's is intended really to give you a short overview of the code of practice and the main requirements of it. And we're hoping that immediately after this, you will take the time to read the code of practice and become familiar with its requirements. So what we see as the benefits of this code of practice for the employer, it provides a framework for managing industrial trucks in the workplace, and it provides clarity about what is legally required. And really what's legally required of a range of stakeholders, including employers, who obviously are a very important duty holder, but also supervisors and managers of those who operate rider-operated industrial trucks, those who are in control of places of work where industrial trucks are operated, organisations that hire or lease industrial trucks to other people, contractors who own, handle, maintain or manage the use of a rider-operated truck in a workplace, and those who either prepare risk assessments or design systems of work for the use of industrial trucks. So we have developed this code of practice in a way that we hope helps employers do comprehensive risk assessments. And also for the legal system, because this is a code of practice, it provides a judge with the expectations around the management and use of industrial trucks in the workplace. So basically, it's a benchmark for what is expected when using industrial trucks. So, how have we arrived here? So we did have a 2001 code of practice, which was in existence, and it was a very good document, although somewhat limited in its application. But it did require updating in terms of its legislative references. And when that became necessary, we saw the opportunity to use this to try and improve standards in the workplace. So we had a period of public consultation on the draft document from the 20th of November 2023 until the 8th of January 2024. We had a separate consultation process with the HSA board and its advisory committees. We considered the submissions carefully and took on board many of the suggestions. Now, there were some limitations there because obviously we cannot exceed what's already enshrined in the legislation. But we did amend the text to reflect many of the suggestions. And one of the key changes was we have introduced a requirement for a level 6 QQI qualification for those who provide training on industrial trucks, and the transition period for application of that requirement was extended from 12 months to 18 months. So that kicks in from March 2027. One of the things that became apparent to us during the consultation process was that one element of the legislation was not widely understood or known, and that is that under the General Application Regulations, Regulation 51, persons under the age of 18 are not permitted to operate lifting equipment or indeed to give instruction to those who operate lifting equipment. So it is important that both trainers and employers take account of that when they're considering training young persons. So the new code of practice, it applies to the use of rider-operated industrial trucks. So it doesn't apply to those that are operated manually. It is rider-operated industrial trucks. The code of practice provides a comprehensive framework for managing all aspects of industrial truck operations in a more holistic, safe and sustainable way. And to do this, we've applied what we describe as a safe systems approach, and Michael will take you through the detail of that in his presentation. The code of practice does, as I say, place a focus on the role of a number of stakeholders, and that includes employers, training providers, supervisors. We have placed a much bigger focus on supervision in this code of practice than would have been in the previous one, because our experience in the workplace is that supervision plays a key role in ensuring safe practice. There are requirements in there for operators. There are requirements for those who work in and around industrial trucks, for those who prepare risk assessments for industrial trucks or design systems of work for use of industrial trucks. As I say, we have looked at training under the new code of practice, and there are a number of things that are carried through from the existing code of practice, but also some of them are strengthened. So the 2001 Code of Practice dealt only with training of operators for two types of forklifts, counterbalance and reach. But our experience is that the range of industrial trucks in use in the workplace has expanded exponentially, and there are much more complex pieces of equipment being used nowadays. So the Code of Practice does encompass many of those. We have had a significant number of accidents with forklifts down through the years, and they continue. Just this year, the last weeks and months, we have had a number of incidents with forklifts or industrial trucks. So there is certainly a need to raise standards in this area. Our experience is that the training landscape has been inconsistent. So there are a lot of very good trainers out there providing high quality courses. But we are also seeing trainers providing courses of quite short duration. And some employers are selecting shorter, cheaper courses simply because they are available. And very often without justification for that. Trainers tell us that employers are placing pressure on them to provide courses of short duration. And the high quality trainers who are operating in the market, they obviously complain of the uneven playing field. So in developing this code of practice, we wanted to, I suppose, put a little bit of manners on that training landscape and encourage people to select high quality training. So we want to raise the standards around the use of industrial trucks, and this includes the overall minimum standard of training provided. As I've mentioned already, we do want those who deliver training in industrial trucks to be qualified as professional trainers. And we want you as employers and managers and supervisors who select training for your operators, we want you to take the time to select competent trainers who will provide training which is suitable and tailored for your needs. And overall, I suppose the aim of the code of practice and our aim is to try and reduce the number of accidents involving industrial trucks. So as I say, the aim of the code of practice is to raise standards in all aspects of industrial truck use. That includes selection of operators, training, and Michael will go through the fact today that there are 3 stages of training, and in particular the last stage of training is generally done by the employer at the workplace. So that is something to focus on today. We obviously want to raise standards of operation. We have put in requirements in relation to supervision because we think that's important in terms of actual safety in the workplace. There was always a requirement to authorise your operators in writing, but our experience is that people really haven't been familiar with that requirement and haven't applied it. So we've carried that through from the old code of practice, but we are asking people now to apply it, and we will be looking at application of it in the workplace. And also there are requirements for refresher and conversion training. So I suppose for the authority, we are now have a renewed focus on looking at industrial trucks based on this code of practice. We will be looking to see it applied in the workplace. So we will be looking at all of this on inspections, and we will also be looking at training records and authorization of operators in more depth during inspections. So I suppose Michael will go through the details of the code of practice, but what are we asking of you today? We are asking you to work with us to raise standards around the use of industrial trucks, to adopt best practice rather than minimum practice, to read the code of practice. It is a very useful document. A lot of trouble has gone into, refining it. We believe it will be a very useful document for employers. You need to consider the implications of it for your business. You need to revise your risk assessment for industrial trucks to be sure that you are in compliance with code of practice. You need to comply with the minimum training requirements set out in the code of practice for any future training. You need to give careful consideration to the competence of the trainers you employ and the duration of training. You need to provide on-the-job training under supervision. This is the third stage of training, and it is an employer responsibility. You need to authorise your operators in writing, and you need to provide appropriate supervision. So that's really what we're asking of you today. And with that, I'll hand over to Michael for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. As Mary said, my name is Michael Walsh. I'm an inspector in the Transport and Storage Unit, and I was involved in the coordination of this code of practice. So what I'm going to do is take you through the code of practice, probably give a little bit of detail about the elements of the code of practice and how it is put together. But before I do that, I just want to give the background. So it's a code of practice, so it's based on the legislation, as Mary said. And the primary legislation is the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act, and you'll be familiar with the duties of employers. Section 8, the general duties of employers to provide systems of work that are planned, organised, performed, to provide information and instruction. That's put in a bit more detail than in Section 10. It talks about the instruction, training and supervision of employees. And what Section 10.4 says is where in respect of any particular work, competency requirements are prescribed. So this code of practice is essentially doing that. It's prescribing the competency requirements for the use of industrial trucks. So that means Section 10 can be applied in respect of industrial trucks by referring to this code of practice. You also have the general application regulations, the secondary regulations, the statutory instruments. 2007, again, that talks about the duties of employers and in terms of the use of work equipment. It talks about, again, putting more detail on information and instruction to employees. It talks about inspection of work equipment, which obviously industrial trucks are. There are a few special elements in there, provisions in there, specifically about forklift trucks. There's a load of stuff in the general applications regulations about that refer to industrial trucks. And as Mary says, that's the basic legislation. That's what the law requires. And then this code of practice will be an element in helping you to comply with those laws in respect of industrial trucks. So what is a code of practice? This code of practice is published in accordance with Section 60 of the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act 2005. So that means it's an approved code of practice under that Act. The previous code of practice was as well, that was, believe it or not, under the 1989 Act, Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act 1989. And the previous one was the very first code of practice that was put into place under that Act. And at the time, it was because it reflected, the relevance and the importance of industrial trucks out there and the importance of doing it properly. So this code of practice is replacing that one completely, and it is approved, as I said, under the Act. And then also Section 61 goes on to say that where a code of practice appears to the court to give practical guidance as to the observance of the requirements of legislation that may have been contravened, the code of practice shall be admissible in evidence. So that's the weight that a code of practice has in a legal situation, and that weight is given to it by the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act, Section 61 there. So that's what an approved code of practice under the Act is. The previous code of practice only applied to the training of operators, and it only applied to the training of operators of counterbalance and reach trucks. So it was very limited in its approach, but it was a very good start. As I said, industrial trucks were causing problems, so it was realised that operators needed to be trained properly, and so that code of practice dealt with the training of operators. It applied in all workplaces. But this new code of practice is going a bit further than that. All the elements of the old code of practice in terms of training have been incorporated back into this new code of practice, and they've been strengthened a bit. And then we've put more onto it in terms of the safe use part of it. And I'll go through that in a bit more detail. So it retains all the elements of the original code of practice, but it strengthens some of it, and obviously then increases the scope. As Mary said, we're putting greater emphasis on the employer's responsibilities. Those responsibilities come from the Act and from the General Application Regulations, and this code of practice then is spelling out how those responsibilities should be applied and implemented. So what we're looking at in the code of practice is that the workplace is safe, that the operators are competent, and that there's adequate supervision provided. So it's taken a more holistic approach to the managing of all aspects of in industrial trucks, and to do that we've adopted the safe systems approach. So the code of practice is divided, well, it's divided into 5 parts, but essentially the first part is just a kind of introductory and legal stuff. And then after that, parts 2, 3, 4, and 5 talk about safe drivers and operators, and that's where the training part comes in. The vehicles themselves need to be safe. So that's the second or the third part. The fourth part is the workplace. So the workplace that you're operating the industrial truck in, is it appropriate for the use of industrial trucks, and is there anything that can be done with the workplace to make sure that's made safer? And then the safe operation of the industrial truck itself. So there, that's the kind of the basic layout of the code of practice, and I'll take you through that in a little bit more detail as we're going along. For the purpose of, we've gone away from the term industrial trucks to the term, from the term forklift to the term industrial trucks. And that's because the variety of equipment that is out there. So we've adopted the International Standards Organization Standard 5053, and that's the terminology that we've adopted for specifying what an industrial truck is. And that tells us that an industrial truck are wheeled vehicles having at least 3 wheels that are designed to carry, tow, push, lift, stack, or tier and racks any kind of load. Now, we further subdivided that, or subcategorized that. We're only, for the purposes of this code of practice, we're only looking at the powered, those that are driven by the powered driving mechanism, and those that are controlled by a ride-on operator. There are other types of industrial trucks, and increasingly we're seeing automation going on out there as well. But for the purpose of this code of practice, it's those industrial trucks that qualify under the definition that are powered by a drive mechanism and controlled by a ride-on operator. They can be powered by electric and combustion engine, but typically it includes the standard type of industrial trucks that we're all used to in the industrial environment. So you have your counterbalance and reach, you have your narrow aisle trucks, your telehandlers, teleporters, side loaders, order pickers, where the operator cab goes up with the load. Lorry mounted trucks, they would be typically what we refer to as Moffats. Straddle carriers, container handlers, again big telehandlers, and ride-on pallet trucks. Particularly those ride-on pallet trucks that have a dual option. It's important to remember that some ride-on pallet trucks have a drop-down footplate. If it's been operated with the drop-down footplate and the rider is riding on that, well, then it's a ride-on pallet truck. So that's important to bear in mind as well. They come in all shapes and sizes. You'll be familiar with this from your own workplaces, and a variety. So that's why it was felt that the code of practice needed to be extended out to cover as much of the variety of industrial trucks that it possibly could. So starting off then with the code of practice and part 2, which is about safe operators. And as I said, that's the bit that incorporates the training. So we start off by talking about operator selection and how you select your operator that you want. And as Mary said, people under 18 years of age are not permitted straight away. And that's not by this code of practice, that's by the law that Mary referred to earlier, the General Application Regulations. But it's just repeated in the code of practice so that there's no confusion about that. We talk about the operation or the authorization of operators, and the operators supposed to, once they're trained and fully trained, they should be authorized in writing by the employer. That's what the terms of the code of practice require. You should do a little bit of an assessment on the medical fitness and of the operator, because again, you're putting a fairly significant piece of equipment in the hand of a person. So you need to know that that person is medically fit to operate that particular piece of equipment. There's a bit in there about medication and intoxication, because again, they have to be fit, again, not just physically fit, but in terms of not being intoxicated or not being compromised in any way to operate this particular piece of equipment. So there's a bit in the code of practice about that. We talk about contractor management. That might be a situation where the person operating the industrial truck is not necessarily one of your own employees. They may be an employee of another person, but they're working on your workplace, so you have an obligation to make sure that they're doing what's required. And then we go into the specifics for operator training. That's covered in two parts, part 2.7, which is the general requirements for training, and then 2.8, which is the specific requirements for counterbalance and reach training. And as I said, that's exactly all that was in the previous code of practice, just repeat it. And what we're saying is 2.7 gives the general aspects of training. 2.8 gives very specific aspects for the training of counterbalance and reach. But what the code of practice is saying is that the advice given in terms of the counterbalance and reach can be used as a benchmark for training providers to be provided for any type of industrial truck. It talks about the training of self-employed operators. Again, that comes from the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act. Anybody who operates a piece of work equipment is obliged to be trained in that piece of work equipment, regardless of whether they're self-employed or not. So that, again, that's from the Act, but it's repeated in the Code of Practice. We talk about the selection of people for training, and they should be selected for their ability to do the job in a responsible manner and for their potential to become competent operators. Because again, it is a responsible job that you're giving that person. You know, you're giving them a piece of mobile equipment to be used in a workplace to do fairly significant and skillful tasks. So it's important that they're sort of selected for their ability. We're talking about the normal duration of a course for operators to be 32.5 hours based on 5 days. So that's on the assumption of 6.5 hours per working day. We didn't pick this out of the sky. This came out of the public consultation. It came out of best in industry practice. It came out from consulting with some of the industry bodies that provide accreditation to their members. And this was the best, as I said, best practice that came out of that. So the 32.5 hours based over 5 days is the desired course duration. Now, we have put in a little bit of a proviso there that it can be reduced to 3 or 4 days. But if the trainer is going to do that, or sorry, if the employer wants to do that, because again, bear in mind it's the employer's responsibility, they need to consult with the trainer. The trainer needs to be able to offer advice to the employer, and between those two parties, that reduction needs to be justified in writing by the training provider in consultation with the employer. And there can be a number of factors that can go into that. So, for example, we talk later about the ratios, maybe 3:1:1 or 4:1:1. But if you find yourself in an example where you have less than that, maybe 2:1:1, that might be an opportunity to be able to justify a reduction, because you're given more detailed training or more specific training to a reduced number of people, which means that they're getting better attention for the duration. As I said, the desirable instructor ratio that's laid out in the Code of Practice is 3:1 and should not exceed 4:1:1. And again, the purpose of that is to make sure that people are getting adequately trained. You don't want a situation where you have large classes and you have 6 people standing around while one person is practicing their skills, because that just won't work. The other part of that is you have 6 people standing around, but also there won't be enough time then for everybody to get sufficient time to practice their skills. So those ratios apply to all practical situations, and they can be exceeded for theory or lecture classes if that's the way the trainer wants to set up their course. Then after they're trained, we talk about the monitoring the performance of operators, because we all know, and we see this from example, that training alone doesn't ensure competence. Yes, they are probably competent when they come back from training, but if they're not monitored to make sure that training is applied properly, well, then the competence levels can reduce. We talk about refresher and conversion training and training for new risks. Now, we haven't put down, or the Code of Practice doesn't put down prescribed training durations. We know that some employers like to renew training, we say, on a periodic basis, like we say, for example, every 3 years. And the code of practice allows for that. It doesn't specify that, but it does allow for that. But what it also says that even with that system in place, we say you have a system where you say, right, we're going to refresh these people every 3 years. You're still obliged to do the monitoring and the supervision in the interim to make sure that the refresher training isn't required before the 3 years come up. And again, that's based on the Safety, Health and Welfare Work Act, because that's the way the Safety, Health and Welfare Work Act is set up in respect of refresher training. Refresher training should be done on an as needed basis based on the supervision and monitoring of the employee. And that's what the code of practice reinforces that. And as I said, if the 3 year cycle works for people, by all means, but the need to monitor and supervise in the interim is still there, because some people might need to be retrained or refreshed before the 3 years is up. It also talks about conversion training. So that means if they're being asked to do something different to that, that they were asked to do when they were being trained. So, for example, if they get a bigger machine, or if there's a different attachment or something like that, and again, the kind of the typical examples are laid out in the code of practice as to when conversion training might be required. We talk about the keeping of training records, and there's an example of a training record in the appendix of the code of practice, which can be adapted and to suit both trainer requirements and employer requirements. We talk about off-site and shared workplaces. Again, the duty to try and ensure that your employees are operating properly when they're not on your own site, or where they're sharing workplaces with multiple employers. And then we talk about the trainer selection. It's the duty of the employer to train people, but and that again, that comes from the Act. But they might decide to adopt professional trainers to assist them with that particular duty. So they should look to make sure that their trainers that the employer are suitably competent, that they have the qualifications, skills, and knowledge necessary, and that they have an ability to demonstrate that. One idea to ensure that might be to see if they're accredited by a relevant industry body. Now, that's not compulsory under the code of practice, but it's very good practice, because that's one way that the trainer can demonstrate to you as the employer that they have the qualifications, knowledge, and they have the continued professional development as well, because those industry bodies insist on all that kind of stuff. Also, the duration of the course that they're going to provide, the learning outcomes, making sure that they're covered, and that's sufficient time to be spent on practical activities. And then going into the specifics under section 2.8 for the counterbalance and reach. As I said, this is lock, stock and barrel more or less from the previous code of practice, except that we've strengthened some of the requirements. And the first requirement that we've strengthened is that we've laid down basic core syllabi, which is a level 5 QQI course. This was developed some years ago when FETAC, the Further Education and Training Award Council, was in place, and that has been subsumed now into QQI. But at that time, courses were laid down, and they have the capacity to be awarded at level 5 award under QQI, but we're not asking trainers to do that, because the administrative requirement for them to do that would be huge on them. So basically what we're doing is we're saying that the courses are there, they're laying down basic standards, and that those courses can be adapted to suit the training requirements of the particular individual. And when they're finished doing the course, the trainer awards their own certificate of training. They're not awarding a level 5 QQI certificate, they're just basing it on that standard. And in order to be able to do that, we're asking that those trainers have a minimum qualification themselves for trainers and instructors, and that minimum qualification is the level 6 Train the Trainer award. So we're hoping that with that award, that means that those people are now qualified as professional trainers. They're qualified to assess needs, to develop courses, to carry out assessments, all of that kind of stuff, to adapt courses. So we're hoping that with that level, that training will be provided. And as I said, a lot of the good instructors already have that. Any of those that don't have an 18-month period to get that qualification. It's laying down that training is in 3 parts: basic training, function-specific training, in other words, function that the person is expected to do in their normal course of their work. They should be trained for that. So again, that requires consultation between the employer and the trainer. This is the kind of work that this person does, and I want to make sure that they're trained in that. So the first two parts are generally done by the trainer, and then the third part, which is a very important part as well, is then on the job under supervision. That means when they come back from their training with their certificate of training, they still need a period of time on the job to carry out the tasks that they've been trained to do, while they're being supervised and monitored by the employer. And then after a period of time, and again, it's up to the employer to determine that period of time based on their own particular function or specific function of the job as to what that length of time should be. And then when they're satisfied that yes, this person is operating as they were trained to operate, they can then sign them off. And by signing them off, we mean authorize them. It talks about training areas and facilities. Sometimes this can be done in-house at the actual workplace, which is probably a good way of doing it. But sometimes they're done off-site in a trainer's own facilities. But this lays down the kind of the area and facilities that need to be provided to make sure that the training is suitable. It talks about training structure and content, and it talks about operator assessment. But again, if the person is level 6 qualified, they're qualified to do all that. Again, it talks about the records, and I refer to Appendix 1 again. And then lastly, authorization. When those three parts of training are fulfilled, those three stages, particularly after the third stage, the employer should authorize the person. In other words, keep a written record. You are now authorized to operate this particular type of truck, and record that in writing. After all, as I said, all the three elements have been completed. There is a transitional period, as I said, for the trainers to get the level 6 training requirement, which means that after the 12th of March, that particular aspect will kick in. In the meantime, all other aspects of this code of practice are already operational. That takes me on to safe vehicle. So we've talked about the safe operator and making sure the operator is safe. Now the next stage is to make sure the vehicle is safe. So that starts with selecting the industrial truck itself. Is it the proper piece of equipment for the work that you want to do, for the environment that you wanted to work in, and for the purpose you wanted to do? It talks about seatbelt and restraints. And it goes into a bit of detail there that no element of the industry standards, the international standards on industrial trucks talk about protective or restraint system. And that can be a combination of the cabs and doors and the tip over protection, as well as seatbelts. And all of that combined is a protective restraint system. And no element of that should ever be removed. So for example, simple things like taking off doors, that should not be done. If the door was designed as part of the restraint system, that means it's part of the restraint system. Seatbelts and other restraints should be used when they are provided, unless the risk assessment indicates that it's not safe to do so. And again, that second part there, the risk assessment part, came out of our public consultation. Certain examples were brought to our attention. For example, one that comes to mind is a forklift that might be operating on a quayside. And the biggest risk there is not the forklift tipping over or crashing into something. The biggest risk there might be the forklift going over the side and into the water. And in that situation, you may not want your operator to be tied in. So the biggest risk there is the water. And so you say, okay, we're going to let up on the seatbelt requirement here, but we're going to put in other requirements to make sure that the operation is safe. And that might mean restricting speed and restricting height and restricting all of that kind of stuff. So whatever it is, it's based on a risk assessment. And if there are restraint systems and the manufacturer's instructions in relation to the restraint systems, the operator should be trained in that, and there should be adequate supervision. So, for example, the simple act of wearing the seatbelt, has that been communicated to the operator, and are your supervisors instructed to make sure that the operators are wearing them? Going on then to fall over and falling object protection and tip over protection. This is usually the cage or the structure around the forklift. That will come as a matter of course with the machine itself. It talks about auxiliary vision systems and warning systems. These are things that you may need to fit to the forklift to enhance safety. And again, this is dependent on risk assessment and task-specific and site-specific risk assessments in particular. So that might be things like extra mirrors, reversing cameras, proximity sensors, all of the kind of things that will. This might be more for the people that are in their proximity, you know, to alert them to the fact that there are operators or that there are forklifts operating in their vicinity. warning devices such as horns, rotating beacons, and all of those kind of things. They help to warn pedestrians in the area that there's forklifts operating. Simple things like service and parking brakes, making sure that they're they're in proper working order. Because again, they're mobile work equipment. You don't want them running off uncontrolled. So that's where brakes comes in. Then it goes on to about the industrial truck authorization. Again, we're going back to this authorization. Who's authorized to operate what truck? And then the ignition control that goes around that. The practice of leaving the key in it and letting anybody who wants jump up on it, that should be eliminated. People say, oh yeah, but only the authorized drivers will jump up and authorize it or operate it. That might be the case, but there's always the possibility that someone else might jump up and thinking that they're going to help and thinking that they're going to do something useful and try to operate it. And that's when we know this from experience that this is what happens. Visibility, talks about visibility, and what we're talking about here is simple things like keeping the windows clean, keeping the windscreen clean. If you're operating over your head, keeping the vision panel over your head clean, because again, if that's not done and if the visibility is not right, it will lead to accidents. We talk about pre-use safety checks. This is something that we took from professional driving generally, where we'd say, for example, the Road Safety Authority expect professional drivers to walk around their vehicle before they use it. Just do simple safety critical components. Just check them to see if they are as they should be. And if they're not, then there should be a defect reporting mechanism. And some defects you can live with, and some defects you definitely can't. So, but if you don't have some kind of checking and reporting system, that'll never be found out. So again, we've in the code of practice, there's a list of safety critical components there that should be checked just on a pre-shift basis to make sure that they look as they should look before the vehicle is put into use. We talk about preventive maintenance. That goes without saying. It is a vehicle after all, so the best way to keep it in good shape is to have a preventive maintenance system. There is a statutory, because most of these industrial trucks are lifting equipment, there's a statutory requirement to have that lifting equipment checked and thoroughly examined, and mostly that's once per year if it's used for the lifting of goods. So and the result of that is a report of thorough examination, which must be carried out by a person competent to do so, and the issue that report. As I said, for most industrial trucks, that will be once a year. Refueling and combustion, we've seen from experience that this can cause problems again. So if that's required, refueling, a lot of this can be gas. We've seen a lot of issues where LPG gas refueling hasn't been done properly. The replacement of the cylinder hasn't been done properly, which can cause to serious incidents. Similarly, even electric ones, we see examples of chargers being overloaded and that kind of stuff, and causing overheating and problems there. It talks about load capacity, knowing the load capacity of your vehicle, and particularly knowing that will change if you're introducing attachments of whatever nature they happen to be, and again, these will be introduced based on the specific requirements of the workplace that they're in, and that's all well and good. But just to know that if you are introducing attachments to the forklift, the load capacity of the forklift changes, and again, it's important to know that. So when you put things on like fork extensions or booms or drum clamps or whatever it happens to be to suit your own specific needs in the workplace, that needs to be done. Even personnel baskets, they're an attachment. But again, just a note to note on that. Regulation 48 of the general application regulations applies there. So that applies to non-integrated baskets. So that means baskets where the controls are not in the basket. They should not be used on lifting equipment other than in exceptional circumstances. And again, Regulation 48 talks about what those exceptional circumstances or sorry, the conditions that should be put in place for those exceptional circumstances. But basically what that's saying is that industrial trucks are probably not, in the most case, are not the most appropriate piece of equipment for doing that type of work. And there are other pieces of equipment like scissor lifts and mutes that are more suitable now. So fitting an attachment, as I said, will reduce the truck's capacity and change how the truck behaves. So any of those things that are put on the truck will change the capacity, and it's important to know that. And then that takes me on to the safe workplace. So what can be done in the workplace to make sure that the operation of industrial trucks is as safe as it possibly can? And the big thing here is pedestrian and industrial truck segregation. So the workplace should be laid out as best as possibly can to make sure that pedestrians and industrial trucks are segregated to the greatest extent possible. And again, that's going to vary from workplace to workplace, and we know that. But it might include putting up things like physical barriers, physical steel, hard things that you won't crash into. We all say in this business, marking lines is one thing, but that won't stop a moving vehicle, whereas physical barriers will. But bearing in mind then that people will have to cross routes and things like that. So things like pedestrian crossings and then visibility and hazard warnings, around corners and things like that. Just to know that there are industrial trucks operating in the vicinity where people are also required to work. The routes that the industrial trucks travel on themselves, they should be suitable for the particular type of industrial trucks that are on. So that takes in things like surface maintenance, keeping it in good condition, the development of cracks and potholes. Letting that go too far might be the one straw that causes the truck to overturn. So making sure that the surface is appropriate for the particular type of industrial truck that's operating on it. That there's sufficient space for the industrial truck to operate, that's, turning space, operating space, maneuvering space, all of that kind of stuff. Height clearances. We all see, classically, we walk into a place and we'll see where the top of the door is getting bashed and battered, and that might be because the industrial truck changed. That might be because the operator was traveling through with the load slightly raised or things like that. But we see the evidence there, so we know it's happening. Making sure that the lighting is suitable, so that the operator can see what they're actually doing, and making sure that routes are obstruction free. All those details are laid down in the code of practice. Also, putting up signage and safety features to enhance that, to enhance the message, to make sure that people know that first of all that there are industrial trucks operating, and then secondly that there are safety precautions that need to be taken. So signage can be used to reinforce that. Vision aids. Now this is vision aids in the workplace as distinct to on the truck itself. So things like sharp bends, putting convex mirrors or maybe cameras, or now we have technology with monitors and things like that look around corners, so that when the operator is coming to a corner, they can see what's around the corner before they come to it. It talks about ventilation. So, for example, if you're using a number of combustion type industrial trucks in an enclosed area, what's the ventilation like? Because there may be a buildup of emissions there, depending on the number of trucks that's been used. It talks about loading platforms, bridges, and trailers. This is a very important aspect of the operation of industrial trucks, because again, we know that this leads to accidents and incidents. So protocols to prevent driveaways. This is where you're using a platform or a loading bridge or whatever it happens to be, and you don't want the driver to drive away. I came across a recent example myself where this actually happened in the middle of a yard. It wasn't even on a loading bay, where the driver for some reason decided to take off while the person was loading the truck with their forks inserted into the truck, and when the driver drove off, they literally pulled the forklift over. So again, the protocols to prevent driveaways are very important while loading is going on. The capacity of the platform or bridge. Do you know that it's capable of taking the industrial truck and the load that's on it? And then if you are driving onto the trailer, the stability of trailers. This is particularly important where trailers are detached from the tractor unit and they're standing on the legs. Driving forward of those legs can cause stability issues with the trailers. So it's important that that's realised and that there's a risk assessment for that particular operation or that particular hazard. We also talk about using industrial trucks on the public road. And basically what the code of practice says there is that if you're using an industrial truck on the public road, it becomes a vehicle on the public road, and it should comply with all the normal Motor or Road Traffic Act requirements. And then lastly, then on to safe operations. This is, you now have a safe operator, you have a safe vehicle, and then how do they operate safely? So it talks about simple things like parking, how to park the industrial truck properly with the forks on the floor and the service brake on. Lifting loads, how they lift the loads, determine whether the loads are capable of being lifted in the first place. If they have various shapes or various masses, can they be lifted? What is the weight? Is it within the capacity of the industrial truck? How to place the load on the carriage? Is it required to be restrained? And obviously, a load should never be suspended over other pedestrian workers. If traveling, should travel low to the ground. These are all the practical advice that has always been out there. They're on our own website in various formats, and basically this code of practice is collating all of those and putting them into one location, one resource. So handling the suspended load. This is about driving with a load that maybe a sack or something like that's suspended on the fork carriage in some fashion. So that means it's a dynamic load and it's capable of swinging. And if you're traveling with that, that's going to change the dynamics of the whole assembly. And does the operator know how to handle that? So again, there's tips on that. It talks about instability. And here essentially what you're talking about is the forklift truck tipping over, and they're notoriously prone to do that, and we come across a lot, and it's usually because of speed, load height, the balance, all of that kind of stuff. The operation not being carried out in accordance with how it should be, but sometimes it's about operation on slopes. Not all workplaces are perfectly flat, and we do know that ramps have to be used from time to time. And does the operator know how to operate in that situation? And going back to again what we spoke about earlier in terms of the safe vehicle, we're talking about it again now in safe operations, operation with attachments. So this tells it gives advice about looking to the supplier or manufacturer. Ideally, an attachment should be compatible with the machine that has been attached to. So if it can be got from the same manufacturer, you're onto a bonus. But if it can't, you need to get advice from the manufacturer as to what can be put on the front of that particular machine. And again, that's going to change the operation of the machine. So the risk assessment needs to be changed to cover the use of any attachment like that. And then the operator needs to be trained, particularly if they weren't trained in that attachment when they were initially trained. That's one of the situations where conversion training would be required. The operator needs to be trained to use that particular attachment. It talks about using a banksman or assistant, and again, this is an important situation, because you don't just put anybody out to do that. You should only put out trained and authorized people, because it's a very significant job. Because if you put out anybody that's not trained or authorized, that can be the person that gets hurt because they're going to do the wrong thing. You're now putting them into the vicinity of a moving truck, and if they don't know how to behave in that environment, they'll be the person that does the wrong thing, and they'll be the person that gets hurt. So they need to operate from a location where they can be seen by the operator, but where they're out of harm's way, and they need to know that. They need to be trained to do that, and they should never be expected to allowed to hold a load in position. And we've seen this. The reason this is in the code of practice is because we've seen incidents happen because of this, where a load possibly should have been restrained. Come back to what I spoke about earlier, but it wasn't restrained, and the solution was, Asher, look, hold it there while I move along. And then the load becomes unstable, and it's going to fall on the vulnerable person, i.e. the person that was holding it in position. And that's how the incident happens. It talks about passengers, and essentially the rule there is that no passengers should be carried unless there's a dedicated seat on the truck for them, which is most unusual, but it can happen. It talks about personal protective equipment. Again, a lot of these forklift trucks, some of them will be open to the elements. They'll just have the tip over protection cage. They may not have doors and windows and things like that. So personal protective equipment for operation in that environment is maybe required based on a risk assessment. We also talk about high visibility clothing, and that might be appropriate. It certainly might be appropriate for the people operating in the vicinity of industrial trucks, but it also might be appropriate for the operator themselves, because they may have to get on and off their own truck, and they might be in the vicinity of other trucks operating around them. So it talks about high visibility and general protective clothing for use with industrial trucks. We talk about distraction risks, and we know this is increasing more and more in all sorts of vehicles. You'll be familiar with yourself with motor vehicles on the road. It's equally the same with vehicles in the workplace. The distractions are exactly the same, and primarily what we're talking about here are phones. basically phones should be banned from all moving industrial trucks. That's what the code of practice is saying. And similarly, headphones. Now, there are some situations where people require headphones for logistics purposes, for communications, for telling, we need this particular load from such and such an aisle to such and such a trailer. And if headphones are required for that nature, they should be of a type that allows safety critical sounds to be heard as well. So the idea of putting on headphones for listening to music on both ears, that's a no-no. But if headphones are required from a work practicality point of view, they should be of that type that allows the safety critical sounds to be heard by the operator. And then finally, we talk about the training of supervisors. And this is important because with the best trained operator, that won't persist unless it's been supervised by supervisors in the workplace, whoever that happens to be. And those people that are doing that need to know what they're looking out for. It may be beneficial if they're trained themselves. It's not compulsory, but that would help. But they certainly need to know what they're looking out for. And again, the accredited industry bodies will provide courses for this exact very thing, and it's our knowledge of that prompted us to put it into this code of practice. Instruction and training for people working in the vicinity of the industrial trucks is very important as well. They need to know how to behave around industrial trucks. They need to know where they can and can't go, and if they have to go beyond that, how they behave to do that. So they need to be trained that won't happen automatically. This is particularly important for visitors and visiting drivers because they're not going to know anything about the workplace or very, very little. So they're the ones that are most likely to do something inappropriate and find themselves in a bad situation. So the idea of controlling them becomes even more important. And then lastly, the last paragraph says that the industrial trucks should be used in accordance with the procedures and rules, most of which are laid down previously in the code of practice. And it's the duty of supervisors and managers to monitor that to ensure that they're used in accordance with the procedures and rules. So that's the code of practice. That's the kind of the basic elements of it and the way they're laid out. And then, so in terms of employers, what are employers expected to do under this code of practice? Well, as Mary said earlier, the first thing is to look at the risk assessments. If you don't have one, put one in place. If you do have one, review it with respect to this code of practice to make sure that what you have is in compliance with the terms of it. You also obviously have the duty to provide proper training. That comes from the Safety, Health and Welfare Work Act, but this code of practice puts the detail on it. So the code of practice details the employer's duty to provide training to all types of operators. You have to satisfy, it's your responsibility to provide the training, but you may get a professional trainer to do that on your behalf. So if you're doing that, you have to satisfy yourself as to the competence of that training provider. So you look at them in terms of their knowledge, skills, and experience. As I said, the code of practice does lay down minimum requirements for counterbalance and reach. The first one is the level 6, so you have to look for that. Have you got the level 6 qualification? Because this is a counterbalance or reach truck. And the instructors themselves should be trained and successfully assessed in that type of truck themselves. So they're the two elements that you're looking for in your trainer. Have they got those? And if they have, yes, carry on. And then you may look for additional qualifications. So that might be additional qualifications that they've got themselves. Some people might have qualified themselves higher than level 6, and that's perfectly fine. These are minimum standards. Other people might be accredited by a relevant industry body. And that's a very good practice as well, because they have the wherewithal to demonstrate their competence because they are trained and accredited by this industry body. You can satisfy yourself as to the quality of courses they deliver because again they're all laid down, and the maintenance of their standards, because one of the features of their accreditation or their continued accreditation is that they have to do continued professional development on a periodic basis to maintain that accreditation. So that means that they're maintaining their training standards. So again, that gives the employer great satisfaction as to the competence of the person that they're employing to do their training. And that's very important. And as I said, the advice given then, those specific requirements for counterbalance and reach can be used as a benchmark for another type of industrial truck that you may have. It may not be sitting nicely into the counterbalance and reach category, but the principles are the same, and they can be adapted for other types of industrial trucks. So and then all training should be carried out in accordance with the terms of the code of practice. You're the people that are responsible for the selection of people for training. Who are we going to train? You know, which one of our employees are we going to pick to put on the industrial truck? So you're selecting them for the ability to do the job in a responsible manner and to become competent operators. You're definitely responsible, even if you go out and get the trainer to do your training, you're still responsible for the third stage of training, which is the on the job and under supervision. They come back from the trainer with their certificate of training, but they should undergo a period of doing the job under close supervision for a period of time determined by yourself. And then when you're satisfied, yeah, they seem to be doing what they're trained to do, they seem to be doing a good job, you sign them off and you authorize them. And that's the next point. You authorize the operator. So this particular operator is authorized to operate that particular industrial truck, and you keep records in that regard. You're obliged to do the assessment of need for refresher training and conversion training. Again, this comes from the Safety, Health and Welfare Work Act, but the Code of Practice gives tips as to when that may or may not be needed. So, but that's the duty of the employer. As I said earlier, a lot of employers like to do it on the periodic basis, you know, every 3 years or whatever it happens to be. But that means that the assessments need to be carried on all the time, because there may be a need for refresher training before that 3-year period is up, depending on the performance of the operator. And then you're also obliged to provide a safety management system that requires your supervisors and managers to monitor the activities of the industrial truck operators to make sure that they're being used in accordance with the procedures and rules laid down in the Code of Practice. That's just an example of an employee training record. It's Appendix 1. It's not a hard and fast form. It's just a template, and it can be adapted to suit the requirements of the workplace, of the trainer, of the employer, whatever it happens to be. It's just a kind of a template. It does lay down the three specific parts, the three parts of training which are important: the basic training and the function specific training, which will usually be done by the training provider, and then the training on the job under supervision. Again, that will be purely the responsibility of the employer, because that's on the job for a period of time. So that's a kind of an example which can be adapted for your own particular needs. I just want to bring your attention to a recent court case prosecution which we just concluded last month, October 2025. It involved an industrial truck, and the employer was industrial truck which caused a fatal accident, actually, and the employer was fined 650,000 under Section 8.2G of the Safety, Health and Welfare Work Act. So that's a significant fine, but it was well justified because it was, as I said, a fatal accident. Essentially what happened, the forklift overturned and fell on top of the operator. So the operator was crushed by the forklift itself. The operator was thrown from the driver's seat and suffered extensive injuries and subsequently died. In the course of the investigation, it was found that the forklift operator was a novice. And when the examination of training records was looked for, all that could be produced was evidence of 3.5 hours of training. That's not training. So that was not appropriate training, and more than likely that contributed to the incident. It also turned out that the manager and supervisor were on leave at the time, so there was no supervision of an inexperienced, untrained operator as well. So all of these factors led to the incident having happened, and that's what happened. It was also obviously the operator was not wearing their seatbelt. If they were, they may not have been thrown from the seat, and if they weren't thrown from the seat, the fall over protection and the tip over protection would probably have protected them, and they may have come out of that certainly, I won't say unscathed, but they certainly may not have been killed. So that was the basic thing. And also in the course of that investigation, it was noted that the seatbelt was fastened at the back of the seat, which meant that it was bypassed. There probably was an alarm on it. So the practice was to engage the seatbelt to mute the alarm, and that was the case on the truck that was involved. It was also the case in other forklifts that were on the premises, because that was noted in the investigation. So all those factors were taken into account in the court and contributed to that fine being imposed. So as you can see, training was a huge element there, because 3.5 hours which was all that was found, was not appropriate training. So that's a recent court case. As Mary said, we're now hoping to promote this code of practice, and in order to promote it, we're going to be seeing how it's been applied in workplaces. So we'll be looking for risk assessments when we're out doing inspections, that risk assessment are reviewed to be compatible with the code of practice, that you have safe system of works in place in accordance with the terms of the code of practice. This code of practice essentially sets down all the safe systems of work requirements for operating industrial trucks. So things like supervision, seat belts, speed, loads, environment, traffic and pedestrian management, all of those things, we'll be looking at those elements to see are they being applied in reality in workplaces. Obviously, we're going to be looking for proper training. We're going to be looking for certificates of training. We're going to be asking, where did you go to get that training? What was your training instructor qualified? And did you check that they were competent? Have you got training records? In other words, does it reflect the model of the truck, the person that's authorized to operate that truck? Are there any attachments involved? All of those kind of things. How were they trained? Was the training specific to the function that the person has been doing, so that they know what they're doing? And if there are any reductions in that 32.5 hours, we'll be looking for the justification in writing as well that has been agreed with the instructor. Because again, if the code of practice is saying that proper training takes 32.5 hours, if for some reason that can be reduced, we want to see the very good valid reasons for that reduction, and people taking responsibility for making that decision. And then the authorization of the operators. As I said, this is very important, so that only those who are trained, supervised, and authorized to operate the particular industrial truck are operating that industrial truck. So that's as far as I'm going to go. It is a comprehensive resource. It goes into every aspect of managing industrial truck risks. So it's a very useful resource for employers. But if your business operates industrial truck, you need to read it. You need to know what's in it, and because only by doing that will you be able to apply it. So thank you very much for listening.